Well, this morning I want to share some thoughts with you about a healing presence. And I want to connect this with, of course, Jesus himself, but also to you and I as members of the church and disciples of Christ at this particular time. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the connection between Jesus and John the Baptist. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about the baptism of Jesus and how Jesus came to the Jordan River and asked to be baptized by John. And John, recognizing who Jesus was, said, "No, Lord, you need to baptize me. I shouldn't be baptizing you." But Jesus said, "Let it be, for this is the way it is to be." And John baptizes Jesus, and the Spirit of God comes and descends and rests upon Christ. Last week, we talked about couple of days afterwards. And John had his disciples, and they were sitting around one day, and Jesus was walking down, and John points to Jesus and said, "There is the Son of God. There is the one who will take away the sins of the world." And two of the disciples instantly went up and followed Jesus. And Jesus recognized that he was being followed, and he invited those disciples to come and see. And today, we hear in the very first words of the passage that Carolyn read for us about what happens to John. In today's passage, John and Jesus go in opposite directions. John is arrested, and his ministry comes to a close. John's whole responsibility was to prepare the people, their hearts and their minds and their spirit for the coming of Christ, so the new message that Christ was going to bring to the world would be receptive by many of the people. But John is arrested, and as soon as John's ministry winds down, Jesus' ministry begins to ramp up. And the first thing he does is he goes looking for some disciples. And he sees Peter and Peter and Andrew, James and John. He invites them to come along. And then Jesus goes out into the countryside and begins to speak and to proclaim and teach. And in the 23rd verse of this passage, it says, "And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all manner of sickness and all manner of disease among the people." And so at this stage, Jesus' ministry begins. And Jesus goes out and touches the lives of people everywhere, not only with his words, but also with his healing power. And so I want to talk about becoming a healing presence. How do you and I become a healing presence today for others? Well, if you look at Jesus, there's no question that Jesus healed. There's lots of stories where Jesus touched people, went in and healed people in lots of different ways. Sometimes he spat in the ground and rubbed mud and threw it in their eyes, and there was a healing. Sometimes it was just going and raising people that had been sick. And Jesus healed in lots and lots of different ways when he was walking the face of the earth. And I want to remind us that Christ still heals today. Jesus still has a healing power in our world. We just encounter it in ways that we sometimes forget. And I love this picture of Jesus in the operating room, standing there with the surgeon, as the surgeon does skillfully operate on the person to bring about healing and health. And Jesus today continues to heal through our physicians, through our counselors, through our surgeons, and brings people to a sense of wholeness and health. And if you think about all the surgeons of the world and all the people that are touched by and healed by doctors, you realize that the healing today is tenfold what it was when Jesus was by himself. But I want to talk about today of healing, not in the way of physical healing, but the way Jesus healed people as well. And what Jesus did was brought the presence of God into the world in a tangible way. That's was Jesus' mission. He was to be God incarnate. He was to be the physical example, a witness of who God is. And Jesus, as he walked, showed the kind of compassion, the love, and the forgiveness, and the grace, and the love that God brought into the world. And it was these qualities that healed lots of people on different levels than just physically. And it's that piece I want to talk about today. How do you become a healing presence? Can you, as an individual, become a healing presence? If you want to be a healing presence, there are a couple of things that we need to be aware of as we begin to think about that. And first of all is we need to have a personal desire for wholeness and health. Now, when you ask that question, most people would say, of course I want to be whole and healthy, right? Who wants to be sick and awful? We all have this idea that we have this desire to be whole and healthy. But it's not quite that easy. Because if you ask anybody, do you want to be whole and healthy, what would you say? Yes, right? Nobody's going to say no to that. But to be whole and healthy involves more than just having the desire. It also has an element of being aware of the different aspects within us. Because, see, there's pieces inside of you and there's pieces inside of me that are not fully whole and healthy. We sometimes call that the shadow side, or the side that you don't want to talk about. You know, it's the part of me that's less than gracious. It's that part of me that's kind of critical and hard to get along with. It's hard to believe I understand your confusion in your eyes when I say those things, right? It's that part of me that's less than generous. It's that part of me that's less than gracious when people come. And there are those parts of us that are less Christ-like than many of us would want to acknowledge or believe. And Jesus talked about this side of us, this desire to be whole and healthy. It happened in the story of the Pool of Siloam. Do you remember that story? The Pool of Siloam was this big kind of pool of water in the temple. And the belief was that when the water was stirred, you know, when there was a ripple or something, that was the hand of God touching the pool, and the people, the first person in after the ripple was healed. And Jesus comes along, and here's this man for 38 years who's been sitting by this pool. Now he can't walk, he's paralyzed. And Jesus comes up and says, you know, why are you sitting here for so long? And the guy goes, well, you know, Jesus, you know, I'm paralyzed and I really want to be healed, but, you know, every time I go to get in, after the water stirs, somebody jumps in ahead of me. And then Jesus asks one of the most profound questions that I believe is in the New Testament. And it's the question, do you want to be healed? Now, if you were paralyzed for 38 years, you would think that's an automatic answer, right? Who's been paralyzed for 38 years and go, nah, I think I'll just sit here for another couple of years, right? So why does Jesus ask this question? Do you want to be healed? And it's a deep question in all of us because there's a part of us that requires healing from emotional scars, from experiences of the past, from bitterness that we hold in our hearts of being wounded long ago. And we have this part of us that is not whole and healthy. And so if you want to become a healing presence, it's about looking at that part of me that is not Christ-like and allowing the light of Christ to come in. Allowing the presence of Christ to come into that dark place that maybe only I know about, right? My partner doesn't know about it. My kids don't know about it. It's about something that happened that nobody knows about. And it's into those dark crevices in our hearts that we want to invite the healing presence of Christ. And the reason we want to do that is so that when we have people come into our presence that are wounded, it doesn't fire off that deep shadow part of us. And that was the amazing thing about Jesus. You know, he could go and be in a healthy relationship with prostitutes and have no issue. He could go to tax collectors and people that were on the fringe of the community, and he could be there and be comfortable with them because they never triggered off the negativity in him because he was filled with light. And so when we get critical, when we want to nip at our partners and our kids and our friends, when we say those things that we're, you know, just want to get at someone, it's important to be aware that that's the shadow part of me that requires the light of Christ. And if I can work on that, then when people come into my presence, I will be able to respond in healthy and positive ways. The second thing, if you want to be a healing presence, means about allowing the indwelling Christ to continue the healing within us. Healing is not a once in a second and everything's better. Healing is a process for most of us, especially on the emotional, psychological, and the spiritual side. Nobody goes through a counsel for one session, all of a sudden is better. It's a process. It's a change that transitions within us, that moves from where I see things in one skewed way and have now a balanced way of looking at life and the people that are around me. And when we allow the indwelling presence of Christ to come, when we allow the light of Christ to come and shine in my heart and in my mind, then my attitude changes. Then my spirituality shifts into a healthier and more balanced way. And then I can become a healing presence to others. Today we're celebrating communion, and communion is the presence of Christ. And lots of people don't understand the full significance of communion. If we did as a congregation, our churches would be full on communion Sundays. Because communion is a sacrament. A sacrament is a visible symbol of something that we can't fully explain and understand. And the bread and the wine is very important because it symbolizes the presence of Christ in life. They're tangible things that we hold. They're tangible things that we consume and we eat. And that's why we share communion. In John's Gospel, the 6th chapter, there was a whole big problem about the body and the blood of Christ in communion. You know, the people thought there that they were cannibalistic because they were talking about eating this body. And there was this confusion. But communion is the presence of Christ entering into us. It's the Christ indwelling in the sacrament of communion in the deepest part of me so that I can be nourished and I can be fed by Christ. And communion is this remembering what Jesus taught. It is about being nurtured at the deepest level in my spirit. And so when you come to the table this morning, I want you to realize the power and the significance of bread and wine. It symbolizes the life and the energy and the indwellingness of Christ in you today. And when you come forward and you take that bread and you consume it, I want you to be mindful of that, because that's what feeds us. Well, becoming a healing presence for others means doing a couple of things. And the first thing is being present with them. To be present just means that every part of me is focused in that conversation. And that's hard today, because it's very easy to be partly there in a conversation. Ever had that experience, when you're kind of there, but you're not? Or have you ever been in the presence of somebody who's sitting there listening to you, but you go, I don't know where he or she is, but she ain't in this room, right? And being present means all of me is focused on you. It means for that period of time, my needs become secondary, and my full attention is upon you. And all I want to do is to be able to listen to you in a deep, significant way. Mark Nepo said this: listening is being completely present to whatever is before us, with all of who we are. It's listening to the words, but also listening to that person's spirit. Do you realize that when you talk, you reveal your spirit? Do you understand that? Now the problem is, the good news is, most of people don't miss that part altogether. They just hear your words, and they think your words are what are important. It's not what you say that's important. It's the message that your spirit sends through those words. And when we're a friend, when we're with somebody that we want to be a healing present, it's important that we're completely there, focused on them, our needs second, and listening not just to their words, but to what their spirit is revealing. And when we can do that, we become this healing presence. Great quote that says, "We must be present enough and receptive enough to hear with our whole being beyond just the words that are being spoken." Well, the second piece here is when we want to become a healing presence for others, it's important to show acceptance and affirmation. John Ortberg, who is a Presbyterian minister in the States, made this great comment. He said, "Acceptance is an act of the heart. To accept someone is to affirm to them that you think it's a very good thing they are alive." It's a great statement. When friends come to us and they're in confusing or uncertain or challenging times, or if they're regretting things or have encountered trouble in their experiences with relationships and others, it's really important that you communicate acceptance and affirmations. Now, acceptance doesn't mean you agree with what they've done. Sometimes when people come, they have done not so nice things. And it's not like saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, it's past. She'll get over it, he'll get over it," right? That's not acceptance. Acceptance is helping that person understand that they, as an individual, just exactly as they sit before you, are people of value and significance. Acceptance means helping the person understand that they are loved exactly the way they are, with even the things that they have done that are not so good, and to let them know that God loves them just the way they are. Now, that's a very challenging concept for us to get, because we really believe that if I improve, I'll be loved more, right? If I'm not so annoying, Lillian will like me more, right? If I'm not so obnoxious, the people of grace will relate to me better. And we have this idea, if I change my behavior, I will be loved by others more. Now, the sad truth here is that it's absolutely true in most human relationships. All I have to do is one thing to you, and your view of me will shift just like that. Doesn't matter what you thought of me in the past. Just one thing has to happen. I just have to say the wrong word at the wrong time, or do this thing that really bugs you or that really hurts you, and you'll change your view of me very quickly. And that's why most people think if I'm nicer, people will love me more. Although that's true in human relationship, that is not true in spiritual relationships with God. God will not love me more or love you more if you change. That's hard to understand and believe. God doesn't love you more because you're going to be a Sunday school teacher or sit in the board or because you've served in Grace Church for 30 years. God doesn't say, "I love you more because of that." God loves you just the way you are. But here's the piece. As we encounter that love and that affirmation that comes from God, that we are precious to God, that we are valued by God exactly the way we are, there is this part of us that wants to draw closer to God. And as we try to draw closer or become more Christ-like, we change. And we become more gracious, more forgiving, more generous, more tolerant, more forgiving. The last piece here is becoming a healing presence for others is really helping them to encounter God's love through you. See, the reality is you're just a big old pipe. Right? That's what you are. You and I are just conduits through which God's love flows. And in every situation, in every relationship you're in, what God wants you to do is just be that channel through which the love of God flows through you and to all the people that are around you. It would be fascinating if we could take a poll of how many relationships that you're in, right? How many people do you impact on a weekly basis? And we'd be surprised because there'd be thousands of people that are touched by you this week. And in every one of those relationships, if you could just be this conduit, this presence that flows the love of God through you into the people that you're going to see at the mailbox at the apartment, in the line in the grocery store, your neighbors, or in your bingo club, or your book club, or your sports place, all the people, if they could just encounter and feel that love of God through you, it would transform the world. And that's what this church is called to be. My hope is that we can so change, right? It's not that you're not nice people, but there's sides of you that are really hard to get along with, right? And if we could change, if we could take those shadow sides and let the love of Christ come in, the goal is that everybody who walks through this door of this church, whether it's Sunday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday night, all we want them to do is to know and feel God's love in this place. It's a quote that I want to finish with. Charles de Foucauld said this: "It's not necessary to teach others, to cure them, or to improve them. It is only necessary to live among them, sharing the human condition and being present in love, to them in love." It's an amazing quote. So you don't have to teach people. You don't have to make them better. You don't need a new and improved, right? We just allow ourselves to share the journey with others, to share the human experience that we encounter in the world today, right now. And then to be present to those people in love. It's a great definition of discipleship. It's about being love in every situation you encounter this week. And so, the issue is not, can you be, but are you willing to be that presence of love in life this week? And my hope is that we'll encounter that presence and that energy here in this place this morning, and as we share communion, and then leave this place and touch everyone we meet this week with the love of Christ, and help them know that they are important and valued by God.